All right, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order at 10 a.m. Welcome to quarterly. My name is Statistical. I'm the SWAN board president. A couple of housekeeping details. We're going to be switching agenda items 5 and 6, the order of those. So 6 will come first. And secondly, I just want to remind everybody there's a lot of Q&A today, so please say your name before you comment so that we can get that into the minutes. Any public comment at this time? Are there any new directors or first-time visitors to quarterly?
Third meeting, but I'm no longer interim, so.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm Nathan from Oakbrook. This is my first time here.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the September 5th, 2019 quarterly meeting minutes?
So moved. Benjamin Westlow.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, we'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Ed. Hi, everybody. I'll advance things here. My name is Aaron Skog. I'm the SWAN Executive Director. For those that are online, Stephen, we have folks online. We have not the full contingent of our Clarity reps in the front of the room, but those that are going to help us present today. So we will do our best to try to pass the mic back and forth, but we may also be jumping in as questions arise in terms of the conversation. So hopefully you can hear us all. So I wanted to just start off with just noting that the Clarity members before us, let me do a mic pass down the line, and then I'll come back and talk more about Clarity. So take it off.
Hi, I'm Amy Pretchel. I'm the head of access services at the Downers Grove Public Library.
Carrie Halter, I'm the technical services manager at Batavia.
And Romano, fiction and reference librarian at Oakbrook Library.
I'm Michelle Krizak. I'm the head of youth and teen services at Messenger Library in North Aurora.
I'm Colleen White from Oakbrook Public Library, and I'm cataloging librarian and supervisor of the bibliographic team.
And other folks that weren't able to be here today, Aaron Sievers, the technology librarian at Wood Park, and Christina Howard from Tinley Park. She's the adult services manager. So, and SWAN staff were also involved in this. There's a huge acknowledgement also needs to go out to Dawn Porterella. She chaired the group and helped lead us through this, but there was a lot of help behind the scenes in terms of the research from all the SWAN staff that are noted here on the slide. Scott Brandywine, Steve Schlewitt, and of course I was involved. I was the official note taker. I really wanted to sit back and just listen and hear everything that was being said. So let's talk a little bit about Clarity. I've tried to update the membership through newsletters and also at the quarterly meetings as far as what we were doing with Clarity, but let's just take it from the top. So this was a task force that was put together as part of our strategic planning initiative, which really I'll address after this, but what we were looking at is having Clarity as a group, and by its name, we were looking at servicing areas of dissatisfaction that we had definitely picked up during our strategic planning initiative. And this was dissatisfaction that was coming specifically from library staff that had attended focus groups, directors passing on what they'd heard from their staff. So we really wanted to dig into this deeper and use our membership to, really bring forward what some of the maybe dissatisfaction is. So the task force, we had, these three key objectives, which is determining what we're calling is the shared diagnosis, which I'll explain, and deliver on solutions. And in combination of all this is really trying to strengthen our collective identity. So within the strategic plan, which we presented to you, we were looking at the fact that there are three possible contributors to some of this dissatisfaction. It could just be, one, areas of dissatisfaction in terms of what SWAN staff, how we're performing, how we're providing support, maybe not providing enough documentation, not the right type of documentation, maybe not the proper consulting. It could also be with member libraries. There may be a mismatch as far as expectations that have been set, maybe that have not been matched with what they were looking for. It could be the way the system is expected to work and the reality of how it works. And of course, we could always look at our vendor or our combination of vendors as also part of the problem. What we really wanted to do is move away from just the, I'll just call it blame the vendor approach that I think often is somewhat easy to do, to say, oh, all our problems are with Search Dynamics. There's the software, and then there's how you implement it, and there's also how you use it. So it's not necessarily going to always be the vendor. So I'm going to pass on to Michelle, right?
Yes.
And we're going to talk about how we did the research with clarity to dig into, what the issues are and begin to sort of arrive at this, what we call the shared diagnosis.
So.
Yep.
So through the clarity process, we relied on 4 methods of research, but we actually started with the strategic plan from last year and reviewing the survey and picking out what we could from the survey, and then realizing that we needed more research, more targeted research, and more fresh research. So one of the first things we did were time studies, which was recordings of workflows used at the circulation desk. And that was really interesting. It was all really interesting, so I'll say that a lot. But it was interesting because a lot of staff were hesitant, weren't really sure what was going to happen or what we were going to get from this. And then once we did it, we did get some fruitful information and learned that it's something that we might want to use, that SWAN might want to use in other areas where it's easier to watch what's happening than to document each step of an 80-step process or something like that. Another area where we got a lot of information from staff was through journaling. Each of the Clarity libraries received journals to share with their staff, and these journals were focused on workflows and enterprise use, largely public services, but also some technical services, interactions, and really surfaced a lot of the areas that are where staff were having frustrations. And that was really helpful to see repeated problems at libraries or across libraries to guide us in where some of our issues are. We also, SWAN staff did user interviews with circulation managers about workflows, and those results were generally quite positive. The managers were confident, they knew what they were doing, and they were able to use workflows to do whatever they needed to do. SWAN staff did see some interesting documentation and training materials at those libraries, and so that is an area of potential future growth. And then the last research component was focus groups. And there were 4 of those at different libraries across the geographic area. And I think we got a lot of really interesting information from those, kind of tied a lot of things together, and then really helped clarify, that's funny, clarify the sort of what is SWAN and what is SWAN supposed to be doing for us. So then after all the research, Clarity worked together to identify the major trends and areas of dissatisfaction. And one of the things that I think the staff chosen for Clarity are all very solution focused. And so we really were trying to move away from blaming the vendor, blaming each other, like Aaron said, and figuring out we do have the power to solve a lot of these problems, or at the very least to make improvements in everything. So that was what you'll see in part 1 of the report on the corrective action. A lot of improvements have already been implemented or started, and then there's more areas that we can all work together to really improve a lot of these issues.
So most agreed that the purpose of SWAN is a resource sharing collaborative. So how do we balance the library's desire for local control with a need for some standardized use within the group? So being creative with SWAN can demonstrate the benefit of the consortium to the member libraries and can also alleviate some of the frustrations that they have. So some of the examples we came up with, and we were doing big ideas. What could we do? So for example, group purchasing of bestsellers. Could we do that? Centralized group purchases for e-resource content. Also managing that content for holds and for purchasing. Could we do grant funding to support e-content? And could we have a creative shared approach to new collections? For example, Library of Things. Could we collaborate to maybe standardize some of those policies and what we use? So some of the stories that surfaced through the task force and through our research activities reinforce these are the 5 key issues that were causing problems that affected both our staff and our patrons. Patrons are often confused, for example, by the same material circulated at different libraries for different amounts of time, with different fine loan periods. Where was the material checked out from? All those things cause problems and confusion for a patron. Staff was guessing at PIN numbers in order to place a hold in Enterprise. Also, local library patrons, and this is in the Fox Valley area, we know this well, are circumventing the DVD loan periods and fines by going up and down the river, finding a library that has more conducive circulation policies and fines. So the full Clarity Committee report has the extensive corrective actions and some of the strategic directives that we want to go toward. But we're just going to highlight some of the bigger issues today. So this is the kind of mess we got into here. The 5 key issues, they're interactive and they're collaborative. The diagram represents how these issues just really interact with each other. For example, if you have an on-order item that's placed in the acquisitions module, and then it's going to be displayed in Enterprise. But then the hold maps take over, and that affects, can a patron place a hold on that new on-order item? So everything is working together, and that's how we have to fix the problem, by working together. So now we're going to share some stories, some real-life experiences of how these key issues impact our library patrons and our staff. And I'll tell you, Ange tells good stories.
No pressure, Carrie. I'm gonna talk about where the crawdads sing, or in Libraryland, make us scream. Definitely this year, this has had the longest hold queue in SWAN. I think at one point I looked and it was something like 1,250, 1,300 holds. A lot. So I am the fiction purchaser at Oakbrook, and I decided to look at exactly how many holds we had, which involves going into workflows, sorting for your patrons, and counting. That's the best way I know how to do it. And I realized that we were gonna need 20 copies, which that's a big purchase for us, even though we're a big library, 20 is a lot. But I did it. I bought the 20 copies, and we flew through our holds. We cleared our list, and there were still 1,000 holds in the system. So we had a situation where we have 20 copies, we have no Oakbrook patrons on hold, and now our copies are gonna start moving around the consortium. I don't have a problem with that. I love that. I wanna help clear your hold list if I can. The problem that we have is that when an Oakbrook patron comes in and sees that 1,000 holds, they have no conception of the idea that if they place a hold today, they will have the book shortly. They will have the book shortly because our materials are prioritized for our patrons. They don't know that. They see 1,000 holds, I'm gonna be waiting for this forever, I'm just gonna go buy it. Or I'm gonna try somewhere else. It's a real problem for us because unless they're in front of us talking to us about the hold, we can't inform them that they should get on the list immediately because they're gonna get the book immediately. One of my coworkers was reading it for her book club and she said, I think I'm gonna buy it because there's so many holds. And I said to her, put a hold on right now, and I can almost guarantee you'll have the book within 2 weeks. She had it in a week because one of our 20 copies got returned somewhere else and it came straight back to the library for her. I tried desperately to inform my staff of this so at least they could reach the patrons that were coming to our desk. But it is a real issue that we can't communicate that 1,000 holds doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be waiting for 6 months. And again, I'm really happy that my 20 copies are now moving around the consortium. I wish that my patrons knew that that meant they were going to get it fast too. And I don't think there's a way to tell us that. I do also want to say that this is going to become very complicated, as Amy pointed out in the meeting the other day, when the paperback comes out, and we've got now another record in the catalog that's going to probably surface above the hardcover one because it's newer. And so now people are going to place holds on the paperback record, and we're going to have, I think at last count, there was 550 copies of the hardcover in the system. So 550 copies are going to go idle while 57 people or 150 people or 200 people wait for the 20 paperbacks in the system. So that's another issue with holds that we have to figure out how do we deal with this. And I think there are solutions, we just have to agree on them and we have to do them. And then lastly, this is a question that we asked over and over and over again in Clarity is, how long is my hold going to take? That is not a question at this point that we can answer with any reliability for any patron. We can tell them numbers. Well, you're 200 in the queue for the consortium, but we have 7 copies. Or we can tell them most things tend to take 2 to 3 months when there's this many holds. But unless I go into every single person who asks, unless I go into the item record, go into the hold record, look at my number of holds, look at my number of copies, and even then, what if something goes overdue? What if something gets lost? What if something is missing? There is literally no way to tell a patron how long a hold will take. And I think that is a source of frustration for us as staff, and it's a source of frustration for them, our patrons. So I think Crawdads is a really good example of, we satisfied our patrons' needs really quickly by buying a lot of copies, but I'm afraid that we're not satisfying their need now because they don't know that we have a lot of copies that will come in just for them.
I think when you brought up the paperback issue, that's addressing these things intersect, and that's a searching problem. If the paperback is going to surface first, our patrons just say, oh, there it is, put the hold on there. They're not looking at both of those items, the paperback, the hard copy, and then looking, oh, look how many holds are here, how many holds are here, oh, there's no holds on the hard copy. You know, so that's a searching issue.
So I think they're using entanglement and combination problems.
All right. Now, as a good example that highlights most of the key areas of dissatisfaction we found, we're going to talk about Blu-ray DVD combo packs. This impacted holds, discovery, SWAN communication, and I forgot what the words are, everything, like literally everything. So at the Downers Grove Library, we were kind of caught in a vicious cycle because we used to split combo packs, which a lot of libraries still do. Currently, SWAN standards allow libraries to choose whether they'll split or not. Splitting the combo pack essentially takes what would be one bibliographic record for the combo and makes two additional ones for the separate Blu-ray and the separate DVD. So now where you would see one record, patrons are seeing three in the online catalog. So what will happen is whoever orders the item first, that's what patrons will see first in Enterprise. And there's a lot of people who know when DVDs or movies are popular, like when they're still in theaters, they're already searching for them and wanting to put their holds on so that they'll be the first one to get them when the items actually come out. So the problem that we were having is that a combo pack would be ordered and our patrons would put their hold on whatever they saw in Enterprise. But when we actually got the item in hand, we were splitting them up. So then our patrons' holds were on the combo pack record when our items were on the individual Blu-ray or DVD records. So then we would have patrons complaining that they placed their hold for this DVD 6 months ago and their holds were not getting filled because our items were on records that had priorities for other patrons because your items go to your patrons first. Now to address this issue, we took a big step back and decided to stop splitting because we thought that that would get our items into our patrons' hands faster. But really, since we changed our process, I'm sure other libraries are having the opposite problem that we had, depending on who is the one ordering first and who splits and who doesn't. So there's an example up on the slide here of IT Chapter 2. This one is not even out of hand because we ordered it September 9th and it actually comes out next week on the 10th. And even since the slide was created, there's more versions of it in the catalog than when I looked at it yesterday. So in the Enterprise search, for our iteration of the catalog, our item was results 6 for the DVD and 7 for the combo pack. So for the DVD, there's 208 holds on 27 copies. For the combo, there were 89 holds on 5 copies. And you can just imagine, before we introduced our new process, our adult and teen services staff were checking where our patrons' holds were and trying to move them to the correct record. But in the meantime, there's already like hundreds, if not 1,000 or more holds on that. So what we were trying to do, to be fair, is to move our patrons' holds and then reorder the hold queue so that people would actually be in the position from when they originally placed their hold, but also we're not supposed to reorder the hold queue, and it's become more evident since we looked more closely into it, like why that is a big problem. So yeah, we've done some things to address this now, and I say it's gotten better. But there are still other things that we can do, I think, to make further improvements. So the good news is that the work that we've done, with Clarity has been looking at this, and some of these changes came out since we've been working on it. We've done our own local changes of no longer splitting, but SWAN has also changed it so that combo packs show a different icon in the enterprise catalog. So that makes it clearer for patrons what format they're actually getting when they're placing their holds. Also, the cataloging rules have been reinforced so that the standard numbers need to be validated on split packs, which will help prevent people placing new orders. They're having their items attaching to the wrong record. And we've also worked with Midwest Tape, the vendor, on the acquisitions process so that when on-order items are imported, that they have the combo pack format as the item is ordered. So if you're a library that splits them, you have to go in and manually change your record to be the individual DVD or the Blu-ray. There's no longer where you can just put it in how you want it and fix it later. Like, the expectation is that you change it now at the time of order. So, I mean, this is just an example. There's a lot of issues that just this has surfaced, and I know that there's a tension between balancing desire to have local control and whether your library splits or not. I know it's a financial concern too, because there's this idea that you save more money when you split one item into two, but really, like, on the back end, your staff is also having to look very closely at the records, move items, move holds, also just the processing of, you're either doing it yourself, moving an item into a new case, making the artwork, or you're paying a vendor to do it. So in the long run, I don't know how much money anyone is actually saving by splitting things. And then your patrons are seeing 3 records when they could be seeing 1. So another just recommendation that came out of us looking at this is maybe we should, as a consortium, decide not to split it. That could be controversial. I don't want to make anyone mad, but just on the back end, the change for your staff would be significant.
I think also we said we've done a standard when we had TV series and they used to be all split and you had, 8 discs in the catalog, and we made it a policy, we're not splitting those. And that's been a great improvement. That was a benefit to our patrons. And this could be the same idea. So we have examples of when we've done standardization and it's helped our patrons.
Oh, and just, one other thing to say about that. If we are still doing this 3-option system, you're taking a process that should be automated, which is acquisitions and importing order records, and then your staff is having to then manually go through and check something that should be automated. So, just another point to make there.
Well, I think the difference with the TV series versus the combo packs is that the TV series have a volume designation, so patrons can put a copy level hold on it. Patrons cannot put a copy level hold on the combo pack because they can't separate out and say, I want the, even if you included all of them on the same bid record, they can't say, I want the DVD versus I want the Blu-ray. They can't make that. So, I mean, that's another option, is we can make a volume designation on the combo packs, and then the patron can select it as a copy level hold. I think that would actually, I've kind of brought this up several other times, but I think that would just be another solution.
Or a burgerized, overlay.
Because I think that's the difference with the TV series, is they can select, okay, I want this 1 for 5, or.
Yeah, because we were a library that kept it as a combo pack and we went to splitting. We did the reverse of what Don was talking. So we have to do that and move our holding off that combo pack. And if you move your patrons, did they want the Blu-ray or did they want the DVD? We don't know that, so you can start moving. We can make the assumption it was Blu-ray and move them all, but that may not be accurate. So, going that route. It's an idea.
Oh, also, full disclosure, I said that we stopped splitting them, but that's not even entirely true because we do still split them for our kids' room department, at their request. So it's not even like we figured it out, but it's a very complicated issue that I think illustrates how complex these situations are, and it's not like one library can just figure it out. We all have to kind of work together on it because we all are sharing the records.
Yeah, I was going to make just one comment also. I don't know how many libraries have them, but my library invested a chunk of change on this media box vending machine a few years ago, and it can't handle like multiple discs for a same record. So we have to split them out so that they each get an individual record for this vending machine. Anything that's multiple discs, we either just don't circulate the second disc, or we have to keep it out of the vending machine, which kind of defeated the purpose of having the newer stuff in this easily accessible red boxy machine.
So we're gonna shift gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about how these issues can impact the patron on the front line. And I don't know if you've ever been to Oakbrook, but due to our unique atrium, you can hear circulation interactions at the reference desk, and vice versa, I'm sure. One night, I was at the reference desk, and I overheard an interaction. It was very quiet in the library. I overheard an interaction between a cert staffer and a patron. And the situation was this: the patron was returning 2 DVDs late. They were from 2 different libraries. One DVD was going to cost him $2 in fines. The other one was going to cost him 20 cents in fines. Our circulation staffer did a great job of saying, I'm really sorry this is happening. I know it's frustrating, but it's because this is coming from this library and this is coming from another library. The patron was really upset, because to him, he has this DVD that's 20 cents. Why can't the other one be 20 cents? $2 is a lot more than 20 cents. He doesn't understand. And I don't think our search staffer necessarily, I don't think I understood why this difference in charge was happening. He said to the staff member, and I totally, in that moment, I felt for him. He said, I don't want to get DVDs from, I don't want to get DVDs from this other library if they're going to cost me $2 if they're late. I want you to stop getting libraries from that DVDs from that library. And the search staffer had to say, I'm sorry, there isn't really any way for us to prevent that from happening. And the person said, I don't want to get anything from any other library then, just this library. And the patron said, the staffer said, well, if you're placing holds, we can't necessarily predict where it's going to come from. It might not come from this library no matter what. The patron was so upset. When I brought this story to clarity, it was really confusing to me why this was happening, and it's an item type problem. The problem is that Oakbrook Library did not have an item type that matched the item type of the $2 DVD. So it defaults in that case to the owning library's rule, and the owning library was charging $1 a day for an overdue. I don't think the search staffer understood that, so how can they explain it? I don't understand it. I can't explain it to them. And also, what am I going to say to the patron? Sorry, they classified their DVD in a different item type, so we have to charge you $2. That's not an explanation you can even give to a patron. This is a real story. This really happened. I overheard this. This is an illustration of our cert map being really large. It's an illustration of our item types not being standardized. It affects everything from fines to when you can place a hold on an item to if you pay a fee at a specific library for an item. This is such a complex issue, and these inconsistencies are a real problem for the patron. They're not, regardless of our position in trying to explain it or trying to understand it, this has a direct impact on that patron. He no longer wants to request DVDs from our library. Now, whether or not he will or not, I don't know. But what he said in the moment was, I don't want to place holds anymore because I don't want to pay $2 when I could be paying 20 cents. And that to me is a really powerful example of how we, as a system, can make a change that positively impacts every patron in every library.
And this over to Michelle. So that was, perfect timing. So that was about an example of frustrating patron experience, and now we have some more frustrating staff experiences, especially from the public service desk, but in all areas of the library. We are blessed with a variety of tools that we can use, or that we have to use to get our work done and to help our patrons. Unfortunately, it feels like no one tool does everything, and that is something that a lot of staff have requested and would really like. And whether or not that's a possibility is another thing. But these are some examples of when you're helping patrons. It seems the vast majority of public service staff are using Enterprise to help patrons, which was actually news to me because I generally use workflows. But I have started using Enterprise more since realizing that, how it can be helpful. Working with patrons, they often don't know the exact title. They need to see the cover. They don't know what the next item in the series is. They need to figure out what the next book is. And doing that in workflows, if a patron comes up and says, I want to place a hold, then personally, I'm going to go to workflows. But then they say, I want to see the cover to make sure it's the right item. So then we have to switch to Enterprise or Google or something. And so there's a lot of jumping back and forth, which with practice can become easier and smoother, but it is difficult and sometimes confusing knowing when to use which tool. And then as mentioned earlier, we learned that some of the staff who use Enterprise primarily are asking patrons for their PIN so they can place a hold, which is a security concern, certainly. And so there's just a lot of different ways that staff are trying to get the most out of the existing tools. And I thought this was a really good example of some of the various tools that we use. And in fact, there are more that I use that aren't even on this list. This was an area that there are little tips and tricks that staff have figured out, but perhaps it's someplace we can improve and give staff more of what they need. And I'm hopeful for some of the new Blue Cloud applications that might make some of that easier for us.
It's funny though, I was thinking this morning because I worked the desk when we had Millennium, like we did the same thing. I mean, my supervisor said, look in the OPAC, it's easier. Go to this website, look for the series. So I think we expect more now, just that we should have something that does everything for us. But just thinking back, I'm like, we always did that actually. Always get to use different tools to get, to find what we did.
And maybe that's a training opportunity of teaching staff when to use which tools and how to go back and forth.
Certainly, I think we noted also that staff confidence in the tool is a big part of this, as far as being able to provide training to help them use workflows better. But I mean, we also noted, Carrie, you had said, you're not using Enterprise really that much at all. You're like, enmeshed in workflows, you use it, all the time. So it isn't to say that you can't master it. I know Andrew said you're pretty good at using workflows for searching, but you do still.
I started Enterprise.
Yeah, you heavily rely on Enterprise. So for me, this was a very informative moment, particularly when we were initially picking up a number of years ago as far as some dissatisfaction around Enterprise. Initially, I was finding more that youth services departments were relying on Enterprise more for that book jacket sort of transaction, like the kid that says, the book I want has got the yellow cover, and you're having to show them, like, is this the one that you want, or is it this one that's green? It's the same title, but it's the yellow one. What I've learned from this, and what Clarity learned, is that, particularly through that journaling process, is that there's far more heavy use of Enterprise and to locate the item and then jump into workflows to then specifically target your goal to use the place.
Yes. And as someone who had generally used workflows primarily, come from a library that did that. I don't this enterprise thing was really helpful, and it's actually become really helpful, and I've started using enterprise more because it has the novelist integration and all of that. But when I'm using workflows, all the time, kids will come around and they'll want to see the edge of the screen, and I'm like, this is workflows. Like, this is not what you have. So then we have to switch over to conform with the patron. So yeah, it's a lot of back and forth. So those were some illustrations of the research that we did and the big stories that show how all of these different things tie together. And now, I think fairly quickly, I'll go through the 5 issues that we tried to tease apart from these really complicated areas of dissatisfaction. The first, and I think one of the biggest areas, is holds management, which if we're part of SWAN so that we can share resources, we share them by holds. So if that's, and when that's an area of concern, that's a big issue then. I believe it's in the task force report, it does have some data about how incredibly strong SWAN is at fulfilling holds, and they are doing a really great job. But there's still areas for improvement. There's areas where increased consistency and simplification across the consortium can help make things even better. So that's an area where we had some suggestions, both short-term and long-term. And then heavily tied into holds is discovery. And this was an area that was kind of hard to tease apart sometimes because searching for the right item to put on hold is what we classified under discovery. And then you put the hold, you place the hold. So everything is tied together, as we've said. This is also an area where I think it shows how Clarity and the different advisory groups have been working together a lot. The cataloging advisory has been working to revise and improve some of their standards, especially with series statements. I think is an area they've done a lot of work. And then also DUX has been working and doing usability testing in preparation for Enterprise 5.0.1. And some of the changes that we're implementing with the new Enterprise are going to encourage patrons to place even more holds and really lead them to placing holds, which then if we work together, we can make that a smoother process in the future. We don't want to encourage more holds and then it becomes a bigger issue. The other 3 issues I think are a little bit more behind the scenes. Acquisitions was an area that some staff had incredible frustration with. And I know SWAN has done a lot of work to make improvements and make it run more smoothly over the last year and even over the last couple of months. I had a colleague that had incredible frustration that she shared in the journaling activity, and then when this report was released in the last couple of weeks, she stopped me and wanted to share how grateful she was that things have improved. And so SWAN has not been waiting for this report. They've been improving things all along, and it's working. So that's really great. Reports and analysis. Blue Cloud Analytics is a huge and very powerful potential tool that we can be using, but it's also very complex and not intuitive. It's hard to use. And so SWAN has been doing some increased training and offering new dashboards and trying to help us get what we need out of our analytics, developing reports that can be shared with us automatically so we don't have to log in, but giving us the option in the training to log in and create our own reports if we want to. This is another area where some standardization would be really helpful, especially if you or your boards are interested in doing some comparative reporting to see how you match up with other libraries. It's a lot easier when you have the same item types and you can really compare apples to apples. So that's an area that more work is recommended. And then the final issue that we came up with was the communication and training, sort of that support issue. It seemed from the beginning, I think part of why Clarity was created was that there was dissatisfaction, and is that a communication, is that because of a lack of communication or communication that's not very effective? And so SWAN has done a lot to make more positive strides and has increased, they're adding new user groups, they have the new forums that are coming. I think they're going to be starting to do more 10-second surveys to get, to get responses from the membership and all of the staff, and then to be able to implement things more quickly. Some of the staff felt that there was part of the communication issue was a trust issue. I'm personally not super clear on that because I don't have that problem. Especially as being part of Clarity, I feel like I'm in constant communication with SWAN. So I think that's an area where we're not, if people don't feel like they have good communication, we're not always sure why that is. Maybe people are satisfied and so they're not sharing, or maybe they want to participate more, but that's just not an option for them. So there are some areas where SWAN is doing a lot of work to make improvements, but it's not all on them. SWAN communication is a two-way street, so we have some ideas for that.
So, in conclusion, I just want to say that we do as a group think that a lot of these problems are solvable, or we can make significant headway on them as a group. But we have to work together as a group, and we do not see necessarily the vendor as being the instigator of these problems. There are things the vendor could do to help us. A firmwarized display would be amazing. But we can solve some of these issues without a firmwarized display. We are all just regular staff members sitting out here, and we're telling you that increased standardization is going to be a help for us, and it's going to be a help for patrons. I realize there's a place for local control. Oakbrook has a library of things. We want to keep that library of things for our users for the most part. But standardization, it's really a huge part of the way forward. I think it's going to be so helpful. I just want to say that our focus on forward progress, just really quick, we've already talked about item types. We're talking about offering standard options so that you don't necessarily get railroaded into one way of doing things, but that there's 2 or 3 ways of doing things, and you pick one of those. Loan consistency, where we have policies that we can explain to patrons. As of right now, it's really hard for our staff to say, well, let me tell you about Chicago Ridge's loan, policies. Oh no, you're going to Evergreen Park, let me tell you about Evergreen Parks. Oh, you want to head over to Allsip? Let me tell you about Allsips. Because our patrons, just like the Fox Valley patrons, they're driving up and down 95th Street, going to whatever library is closest to them or has what they want. But our staff can't necessarily explain those libraries' policies because we're so different. And I think that if we standardize, we can make our experience better. We can surely make our patrons' experience better. And that's ultimately why we're here, is to make that patron experience a better patron experience. So I hope that you guys hear this plea for standardization and answer it. And I hope we can come up as a group with solutions for these issues because I think they're out there. And the report does a great job of laying out immediate corrective actions and some longer term things. And so if you're really curious, read the whole report. It's got it all in there. I know it's really long. Skip maybe the second section on the research if you're not that into it, because all the solutions are in the first part.
Okay, that's your clarity presentation, but I think there's a lot of folks here that maybe if you have questions in the report, we got a lot of the reps here. We can do our best to answer a lot of things, but as we're noting, there are corrective actions in there, some bigger goals. in talking with the board, I'm looking to map out the next year, 2020, to be like, let's plan our upcoming quarterly meetings or membership meetings around, how are we gonna maybe look at, let's say, this first thing about some standard options. A great example of that would be going find free. There's a lot of interest in this, and rather than each library kind of come at this with the feeling like they have to reinvent the wheel, right now, SWAN staff have got a pretty good handle on, just for example, like a find free approach. We could present like 2 solid options for a library if you're looking to do that. We could say, here's the approach that you probably want to take with this. Is an example of that. The things like the combo pack issue, it's a lot more complicated. There's times where I was like, we did away with the box set splitting up, why can't we do this? And it's like, it's not insignificant in terms of probably the amount of ordering, as I was talking to Michelle about this. Like there's a lot of these being ordered. But we're also finding that this is the sort of thing that, it's an industry thing that's happening. We're getting these items now, we're grappling with it. As I was also pointing out, even our patrons' expectations in viewing has also shifted, that allowed us maybe to do away with splitting up a box set of TV series because they all got used to just streaming everything and watching everything at once versus the blockbuster model. So I think we're also having a lot of kind of outside influence as well in the role. So I'll stop. Questions out there? Anything for the board you want to add, board members? Tim?
First of all, I love the document, and on page 8, you guys talk about the balance between local control and, finding a solution for the whole consortium. To me, I think it's just kind of interesting that almost all the conclusions only support going to a unified model, and there's very little idea that libraries with local control wishes, wants, or desires are supported by this document. And I come from one of the new 19, and so my perspective is, we love SWAN. And we came from a Link world to a SWAN world, and we've been in the SWAN world for 2 years, and we love it. I just think that I just think there needs to be a little attention to the fact that local control probably needs to maybe be respected a little bit more. Because I think this document is like every problem we have could be solved by having a unified solution.
I don't think that's.
Well, I think if you look,
I don't think we're going to be able to solve all of our problems by moving towards standardization.
If you look on page 16, virtually every solution leans towards a collective solution. So it's just.
Well, I think more of what we were thinking is that it would simplify things if we could come up with not like everybody has to do the same thing, but maybe a smaller menu of options than everyone can do whatever they want. Because what happens in a system this large, when you need to accommodate people being able to do whatever they'd like to do, is that you're making our circulation map and our hold map extremely complicated. I don't know if you spend a lot of time in the cloud running reports, but even just me personally, just finding the options that I need to set up a report is exhausting sometimes, because we maybe use 30 item types and I have to sort through a list of hundreds to find what I need, even just to set up a simple report. So we're not suggesting that there's a one-size-fits-all model that's going to satisfy everybody, but there's a lot of room to move a little bit in the other direction.
I just want to dovetail on what both of you said, because I think find free can be a hot button topic and people have to bring it to their boards to approve it.
Yeah.
But I think the item types, when you look, like you said, there's hundreds. And whether you're using some of it is just terminology. And I think that's a very easy place for us to start to take baby steps.
There's some low-hanging fruit that we can grab before, we're not saying that everybody needs to do the same thing, but it's like we can simplify. We've got a hot mess right now, and it really doesn't.
Right. You can
That's
have
a perfect one. So that's just a baby step.
If
If you come to each library and say,
you have these, and let's just make all of these one thing. I think we can really agree on some of it pretty easily without realizing.
100%, because
made it.
whatever you call your hot copy collection in your library, the item type can be anything we want it to be. So if we want to say all of those short-term loan local use collections are called hot copies in the back end, that's fine, and then name it whatever you want. But having 40 item types for everyone's specific hot copy collection is causing real problems in the hold map and real problems in the CERC map. And so I think, again, that's a great example of, we can clean this up in a minute. We just all have to agree to name our, well, we have to agree to name our hot copy collections just the same way.
I mean, I ran into that with Playboy, with their.
I don't think, Tim, that necessarily, I feel like SWAN has always tried to make sure that we were having your local choice, be met. So I don't think this is meaning to sound like it's a complete, evaporation of that. I think that there is the opportunity here to do consolidation and still keep you at the local level pretty happy, your patrons pretty happy. But it's not, doesn't mean that we're all like gonna be, branches of a single kind of organization. Although there are times where it probably makes sense on 95th Street, maybe there should be conversations around that, in some geographic areas. In the past, we've seen the Atlas Group attempt to do this, where they were trying to look at doing some loan consolidation. I think that they went at it initially like, yes, we're gonna do this, and then as they started getting into it, the details were like, it's a little harder than we thought, but they made a really good go at it, the 3-week, 2-week, 1 week. It's possible. And when they approached SWAN staff, they're like, we wanna do this, is this something you would help with? Absolutely, we would help with that, those sort of efforts.
And I was just curious to hear, can you give an example of a local thing that you would not want, that you really want to keep, and why would I have to change this?
I don't have an exact example.
Well, I would say some libraries, their loan periods and they're fine. I mean, that's a big thing, and everyone isn't going to say, yes, we're going to go fine for it, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Or they're going to say, we get $20,000 a year from that, we're not going to say no, yes, it's going to happen. That's not absolutely.
Well, and I know with our fines, we're a revenue generator, but with the automatic renewal, it's really big fines.
Yeah, but some libraries opted out.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, I feel like there's almost like, for people who've been in SWAN, it felt like there were just all these libraries that came in with their own and it all merged together and there never was a clear standard. And so there's sort of like, you can have every library doing their own thing in this one big mess, or you can have a standard that libraries can sort of opt into or in local control can go off of. And I think that's what clears it up, and maybe that's why there's been this, the report talks so much about standardization.
Yeah.
I think to then jump off, you need something standard to jump off of for local control, instead of it all just being local control.
We've had this discussion internally as far as, we're looking at 3 new libraries that are they're standalone, looking to join, and be able to present them a menu of options that are sort of like, this is your menu that you pick from for what you want. But then we also know it's a little hard to present that, whereas like, well, there's a lot of libraries already in SWAN that maybe not following that menu of options. So we need to be able to like say, we're gonna have conversations internally, with our existing membership of what does that look like, what does that mean? While we're also looking to present, the 3 new libraries looking to join SWAN as far as, here are your best options for you based on what you're doing now. So it involves a consultation. I wouldn't say that the 19 libraries that joined felt like, we had to go through a lot of consultation and, work, and maybe there was feelings that they were having to give a little here, give up a few things. So it wasn't as much of a free-for-all maybe as it might seem, because we were really trying to make sure that we matched what was being done locally with what we had. But it did mean those libraries were giving up some things that maybe they had previously done in their consortium. But I think we had noted at a prior quarterly meeting, like both Lincoln Magic had taken steps as a group to like allow all their new material to flow without restrictions amongst those libraries. And so it was a little bit of a surprise. I know like Messenger is a good example of that, where we're like, we used to be able to do that, now it's a little bit different, all of our new stuff is leaving, we need to restrict some of it, so it was probably maybe something that, we're gonna have to also look at, but we know that the new items also present opportunities for us to maybe rethink how we handle it. As far as group purchasing, I've been thinking quite a bit, and we had a long meeting with like Baker and Taylor over at SWAN headquarters, and digging into the idea of rental copies. The idea that if we were to just, take the opportunity to get 300 copies rental to basically blow through, our crawdad problem, and then it's over, we could just be looking at creative approaches as a group to help with this.
I can't recall if this was specifically mentioned like in the report, but another thing that is happening now that I think we can all agree is a problem is that some patrons go into Enterprise and find that they can't place holds on new items.
Yeah.
Because unless a library has an on-order copy that is holdable to them, they can't place the hold. And does the patron know? Like, how would you expect a patron to be like, oh, okay, I can't place this hold because, my library's on-order copy's not there yet. I'll just, come back and check tomorrow or in a week and then try and place my hold. I mean, that's not good service. So, yeah, we gotta do something.
And we did say maybe an option is, libraries who don't want to loan that new item, the option is that SWAN adds a holding that would allow anybody to place a hold. That would just be a holding place.
Things that we can do with the system that we have
Yes.
that allows that to, work and
If
how.
you went the Baker and Taylor route of the group, then that.
There are some other options like that where we could be looking at, group activity or group buying that we don't do now. But I think that they certainly could be possible. And I think alluding to our Blue Cloud acquisitions pilot, there's some new features that would be coming with that system, but also that system was also somewhat designed with another consortia in South Australia with that idea of doing more group purchasing together. So it's not something that SWAN necessarily has done at the physical copy level. We've done more group purchasing around electronic content. So I'm excited to explore this idea. There's probably some things we could experiment with, that wouldn't necessarily require a whole lot of effort. We could just try it, see how it goes. And those are things that I'm looking at, potentially putting into the 220 plan with the SWAN board. Other questions? I want to thank our group. Questions online, Stephen? Nothing yet? Others in the room? Tim?
What's the next step with this document?
Well, we're going to have Clarity meet again. I'm going to announce the opportunity to provide written feedback as well, and they want to review that written feedback. I would say as directors, I think it would be good for you all to take this document and maybe have some discussions, maybe more at department level or management team level, just to see, one, I want to know, and Clarity wants to know, do these findings resonate with your staff in terms of, are these the areas of dissatisfaction? Did Clarity get it right? And that said, the part one does a lot to sort of synthesize everything, but there's also a lot of things that part two has that I think I would say it's worth reading in that it did pick up on a lot of little stuff, so I don't want your staff to feel like, well, they didn't get the one thing that drives me crazy, every week. It's possible it's probably in part two as part of that. So it's not to say part two isn't totally skippable.
Okay,
But if you're really like, it's 50 pages, what I read part one. And then from there, Tim, I want to be able to then incorporate action steps into the plan for 2020 to be able to lay that out and be able to update you all. These are the steps that we're taking. These are the areas that, there's some consensus on as far as the low-hanging fruit that we could, move forward, have some discussion either at these quarterly meetings or filter those into our advisory groups. That's where I'm at right now with it. But right now here's the report, here are findings. Do you feel like they got everything? Did they get the main issues? Do your staff feel like the main issues were surfaced? So there'll be an announcement coming out as far as to provide feedback. Ready for the next piece? Well, thank you, Clarity. Coming and presenting. You're welcome to hang out for the rest of the meeting, hear about OMA and 501c3 stuff. We'll do a little shift for our friends online. We're gonna move to the next part of our presentation. Oh wait, you ready to do that, Ted? Yeah, go.
Ready to go? Okay. Okay, so about a year ago, let me start even there. So in the strategic plan, one of the issues that we were hoping to address is what form SWAN should be in order to maximize participation by the members, specifically how we vote. So one of the strategic plan objectives was to investigate the possibility of becoming a 501c3, to change our bylaws and to, in that way, sort of sidestep the Open Meetings Act. So about a year ago, the board started to research what it would mean to become a 501c3. So 2 weeks ago, Aaron sent me this graphic with no explanation. Why is he sending me a picture of pink bunny rabbits? But actually, it's a rabbit hole. This is sort of we're the rabbit, and 501c3 is the hole. So we have been working with the lawyers, having a lot of discussions, digging really deep into this 501c3 thing for about a year. So now I just kind of want to tell you what we know and where we are, and hopefully get some feedback on direction. So in our current iteration, SWAN is an intergovernmental entity. And as such, we are bound by the Open Meetings Act, which means that when we vote on financial matters, such as budget or amendments, we have to do that in person. And it has to be a 2/3 majority of those present at the meeting. Looking around this room, there are not 97 directors here. There rarely are 97 directors, and for small libraries or far-flung libraries, getting to quarterly can be a challenge. And because of this requirement, they lose their voice to vote on financial matters. So there are some considerations and some exceptions within the Open Meetings Act, and this has even come up before in a quarterly meeting. Why does Rails get to do it? And why can't we do what Rails does? There is a provision within the Open Meetings Act, you're probably aware of it, that allows for organizations of a certain geographic size to be exempt from the voting, being present to vote. We are not big enough, maybe we're not big enough yet, but we are not big enough to qualify for that provision, so that's out. Also, there's a provision for remote participation. We all know this with our own boards, that if a trustee can't make it due to very specific circumstances, they can appear digitally or remotely. That doesn't work because that provision is meant to be the exception, not the rule. So we can't rely on that provision to allow remote participation on a regular basis. So as an intergovernmental entity, compliant with the Open Meetings Act, there are no exceptions, there are no provisions that allow us to have remote voting. I feel it's important to mention at this time, though, there is another way that we could be an intergovernmental entity and comply with OMA and allow everyone to vote. And that would be if we modified our bylaws to switch voting as advisory voting. So if the membership voted in an advisory capacity, and then the binding vote would take place in the board meeting amongst the SWAN board. So if it were an advisory vote, we could vote electronically, we could vote remotely, by smoke signal, however we want. And then that advisory vote would be given to the SWAN board, and they would have the binding vote in the board meeting, ostensibly informed by the advisory vote of the membership. Something to consider. Back to the 501c3. Who knew that reconstituting as a 501c3 would be so hard? So the first thing we did was ask our lawyers to create an opinion on what it would mean for us to convert to a 501c3, what it would require of us, and what would be involved. That their first message is in your packet. If you read it, it's not as clear as mud, but maybe as clear as very dirty glass. So we asked them a bunch more questions, and they submitted a second legal opinion, which was a little bit more clear, but contained some information that we were a little troubled by. And specifically, if we were to become a 501c3, we would still closely resemble an intergovernmental entity, so closely that we would have to have a board made up of people who were not us. So we would have to have an independent board so as to demonstrate that we are not still an intergovernmental entity. Always our board has been made up of library directors. So we were a little troubled by that, I'm sure you are too. So that was unfortunate news. Additionally, there are further complications. Because SWAN is an intergovernmental entity, the SWAN staff can participate in LIMRIC, and they can participate in ICMARC, which is their pension plan. 501c3s are not allowed in either one of those organizations, so it would mean that we would have to start fresh, both with SWAN pensions and their LIMRIC health benefits, which is kind of a big deal. So that's what we learned. In addition to the voting component of this, there was also a component about fundraising. There are certain grants and fundraising opportunities available to 501c3s that are not available to intergovernmental. We all know this. We can't get those good grants. And we're still exploring ideas around fundraising and what that could mean for this organization. So we haven't given up on that. We haven't given up on anything. But what we'd really like to know from you, the SWAN board, and we're genuinely asking, what would you like us to do now? Knowing what we know, do you want us to pursue the 501c3 further? Do you want to, at a future board meeting, have a discussion about the possibility of what advisory voting might look like if we changed our bylaws to accommodate that? Do you want to just go with the status quo and give up? I think that would be unfortunate because as we continue to grow and get larger geographically, the expectation that you have to be physically present to vote can be onerous. So I'll open it up to you. If you have any questions about what we learned, or if you have any feedback on what you think logical next steps would be. Don't make me call on you. Yes, Jacob.
Jacob from Oakbrook here. When you say, the geographic side, like how much bigger do we have to get before we can get around the?
Significantly bigger.
So we can't just like go pick a library down south and
No.
Okay.
Other questions? Feedback, yes.
If we went with the advisory voting, we would still, though, have to establish a board of individuals who aren't.
No.
Oh.
So advisory voting is something we could do like today. In our current iteration, we would have to change the bylaws, but we wouldn't have to change how the board is composed. Basically, you would be giving your binding vote to your duly elected representative on the board, who would be informed by a membership-wide advisory vote. But I think that's the best. Okay.
Back when SWAN was doing the strategic planning, there was discussion of how we're functioning as one type, and I apologize, I don't remember the title, but representative versus direct, and how we're still voting on these issues even though we really are functioning as representative.
That's correct.
So I think some clarity around that makes sense, determining which one really are we, and then following that structure. But one thing I would say is that we also brought up, and I don't know if this is part of this discussion or not, that maybe the representation should be somewhat regional, or it should be by size, or there should be something so that if we move to advisory, the smaller libraries still feel that they have a voice or an equal voice as the larger.
Yeah, those are great points. We did talk a lot about, are we a direct democracy or a representative democracy? We are a representative democracy. The 7 of us were elected, yet we function in many ways as a direct democracy because we hold these votes at quarterly that are, only half the people show up for. So an advisory vote system would clarify that we are in fact a representative democracy. And the board is the binding voting body. So, and I also like your second point as well. Yes.
Question online, have we included legislative change in our discussions?
If we asked the legislature to pass some change to the laws that govern, say, the OMA or I don't believe we have.
No, we haven't.
But that's something we could look into.
The legal opinions, though, obtained do reflect what has changed in past years. So, I mean, there are, for example, maybe other consortia in the state that are a 501c3. They still try to operate as best as they can, complying with OMA, Freedom of Information Act. The issue wasn't necessarily that we were looking to completely skirt either of those. It was the idea how much more flexibility could we build within the organization if we weren't necessarily, having to strictly adhere to those. What we've learned is through that all the work that the College of DuPage did for us, which was they really went to court to try to get this issue clarified with their 501c3, and it turned out they lost as far as that claim that their 501c3 was indeed no longer compliant to OMA and such. And this is where we have the most current kind of legal understanding of what this means. The implications for an organization like SWAN means it does affect our governing board. It does present opportunities for fundraising outside of just strictly getting all of our funding directly from the membership, which I was excited about to be able to I want to save you guys money and get money from a sort of a foundation. So we're still at that point. I think the biggest, from my perspective, I've seen the biggest stumbling block around the 501c3 is wrestling to the ground this idea of what governance would look like with a board that is, let's say it's a 7-member board with 4 representatives that aren't necessarily SWAN library directors and maybe 3 that are. What would that look like? How does everyone feel about that? So I think that was where we were kind of at with it. Am I summarizing that?
No, you're right. I mean, there are options on the table, but the board is looking for guidance in which direction you want us to push this. So, yes.
If we went with advisory voting, do we have to change the hierarchy of 2/3 votes or anything that the board would see to then take that action?
That's all in bylaws.
That's all in the bylaws. We have flexibility there. So ostensibly, we can say whatever we want. The vote is going to come down to the board, and informed by that advisory vote. So I don't know that we would even need to be that specific in the bylaws because a simple majority would inform the board's voting. And I know that there's this thought of what if it's a rogue board, but I don't see that happening. They'd certainly be a one-term board if they were.
So knowing that provision of OMA for voting on financial and fiscal matters is applicable, and I'm sure SWAN is on top of this, do we feel like all provisions of OMA then are applicable to SWAN, and do we have someone making sure we're compliant?
The board has an OMA compliance officer, and because we're all here, this is a board meeting. And so we always make sure that we have a quorum of the board because we're here discussing SWAN business. So this is technically a board meeting, and we're cognizant of our need for a quorum and posting the agendas. Yes, so yes.
And just to be clear, we've mostly always taken the real safe approach of sort of a boot suspenders, as I like to call it, where if there are membership votes on certain things, then there will be
typically an action step at the board level to ratify some of the membership decisions, just in case it was ever called into question, like, well, maybe that was not proper. It's like, well, the board is reflecting the will of the libraries, that took place during a period of voting.
For example, if we don't get a quorum of membership at a quarterly where we need to vote, we would then ratify the vote at the next one. Okay.
I would just say that in a sense, the advisory voting, if we're able to do it electronically and a vast amount of those 97 libraries are actually able to give input, that may represent more clearly what the wishes of the SWAN membership actually is.
I agree, because we know that there are libraries who never come to quarterly. Directors I've never met might be coming to quarterly for years and years.
I guess the concern for moving forward really, from my perspective, is the staffing issues with pension and health insurance and things like that, because that's affecting a lot of people. What's the value we're gaining by becoming 501c3 versus how many lives are we impacting with that decision?
I agree. Yes.
Right, and so that's actually tying into a few questions that we have online. The first is basically is the trade-off of changing staff benefits, membership voting, and things like that. Is that worth what we may or may not receive in grant funds?
It's impossible to say, but I mean, we have been sort of looking into the types of grants. It's a little nebulous. It's a lot to, we feel like it's a lot to give up for. But that doesn't mean that we can't explore other fundraising opportunities or, one thing that came up was maybe there's a SWAN Foundation, like we have in all of our own libraries, that's operating separately. And then they could be a 501c3 and pursue these grants on behalf of the organization, much the way our support organizations do in the libraries.
Sure, and so that's one of the other questions is, have we explored other fundraising opportunities that are non-501c3?
Not really. We've been looking at all sorts of grants, but no. Have we?
No, if there's some of the sort of, I'll just call them grants that are available that we can take advantage of, and typically those have been through Rails, we'll definitely apply for those. That's how we've also helped fund our annual event or offset some of the operating costs for that. So those are available, and certainly the grants that are available to offset one-time costs for libraries joining, that's another big one that Rails has offered. We use that, but outside of that, not necessarily. That isn't to say there aren't some there that we could continue to explore and look at that are more maybe IMLS level or
right. And Stacy's a board member.
Stacy Whitman from the Eisenhower. Well, that's one of the things that we had discussed in the course of doing the strategic plan is pursuing grant opportunities and how we could go about doing that. So we had initially looked at grant opportunities under the auspices of converting to a 501c3. Looking for direction from the membership would inform how we go about looking for funding elsewhere, and, taking that into consideration, if that makes sense. So kind of answering that question initially and then, having that inform our progress from there.
Anything else online?
Yeah, one last one. Is there any additional staffing consideration if we were to reconstitute as a 501c3 in pursuit of grants or any other funding?
Possibly. Possibly. I know many of us in the larger libraries, we have a dedicated person. That's something that we might consider down the line. If we were a 501c3, that's a possibility. But anyone else? So I'm hearing you're interested in having another discussion maybe about advisory voting. You definitely want us to continue to look into the fundraising aspect and possibilities surrounding that. And on the 501c3, take a beat. Is that right? Okay. Anything else? All right, great, thank you.
Okay. Ted? I think from here on out, okay, there's some things on the agenda that I haven't touched on. There was an information item on the agenda where it mostly pertained to the executive director report as far as strategic plan. I wanted to make sure that I just stopped there and noted that it's in your packet. If you're looking at your packet as far as those portions of it, let me know. I'm trying to give you written updates as far as in advance so you can see how things are progressing as far as our activities as related to the portions of the plan. Of course, the sixth part of our strategic plan, which is the funding options to support the research and development initiatives of SWAN, that is sort of more dependent on what we're looking at as far as the 501c3 work. But I'll stop. Anything that you've seen in there you want to ask me about? I also know that the libraries are interested in SWAN. I don't know how some of you in that geographic area feel about Glenside, Roselle, and Warrenville. Potentially joining. Yeah? You happy about it? So again, we'd be looking at those libraries as far as a timeline for next year. And one of the things that we talked about doing as far as a approach that we'll stick with is every other year we'll be looking at the opportunity for libraries to join SWAN. So it's not like we're adding a series of member libraries every year. It felt like it gave me, at least when I have these inquiries, the opportunity to say, this is what the timeline looks like. This is what you need to prepare for. And it also allowed me to give like Rails grants an opportunity to say, I've got 3 libraries looking to join. Prepare yourself and your budget, and this is what the estimated cost would look like. So I feel like this is a very solid approach. That said, there may be some spectacular opportunity that comes up, and maybe we have to have a discussion as far as maybe we have to go outside of our timeline. But the timeline is basically the budget that I'll be presenting to the directors for you all for discussion. It will be a February meeting, and a vote in March will reflect adding these libraries, costs associated with that, grants, potential revenue coming into our reserves. So just be aware of that. Even though that's in there, we'll be having to also look at some sort of membership vote to accept these libraries to join SWAN. So just so you know, there's an membership approval portion to that, and it will be online voting to do that. Any questions about that part of the report? Ready to talk Blue Cloud Acquisitions pilot? Boy, that was a big part of your pack. Sam Diedel's going to come up. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to meet with Sam. Sam's our bibliographic services consultant, working tirelessly behind the scenes, but also was heavily involved in the pilot. So, Sam, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Great, thank you. This is my first time talking in front of you all, but I've seen a lot of your faces and met with some of you, so hopefully you'll know your face. I'm just talking to you, like Erin said, about the Blue Cloud Acquisitions pilot that we wrapped up about almost 2 months ago. And so for those of you who aren't aware, before I talk about the pilot, Blue Cloud Acquisitions is, of course, the acquisitions product for the Blue Cloud suite that Statistical developed. So like all the other Blue Cloud products, it is all cloud-based. Everything is in the cloud, it's accessible via a web browser. What makes Blue Cloud Acquisitions a little bit unique is that all of the acquisitions data is housed in that Blue Cloud environment. None of it is housed in the Symphony server. So the reason that's important is because some of you might be familiar with acquisitions reports, taking a lot of time in the report scheduler, discarded items being held up because open orders on titles, things like that. Moving all that data into the cloud would potentially remove all of those frustrations. So it's especially interesting for that reason. Right, so it's an attractive idea, but Blue Cloud Acquisitions has also not been released yet. It's still in beta testing. That's why we did a pilot. We were involved in the phase 3 pilot. So they've done a few different pilots. And ours, who was involved? So of course it was SWAN staff and Statistical staff. Their point person on this project and with the cataloging as well is Mike Hilmo. We have 2 libraries that worked with us, so LaGrange Public Library and St. Charles Public Library. 2 staff members for each library were involved in the pilot and given logins, but we have 2 point people that we worked with extensively who are actually here. So we have Rebecca from LaGrange and Julie from St. Charles. And the purpose of the pilot was to evaluate the product, to test its readiness for use, to find any bugs that may be present, to give valuable feedback to SWAN Dynamics, especially as a large consortium. We have a unique perspective. We don't do centralized ordering, which makes us unique, so we need a lot of permissions and granularity and that kind of thing. So that was our main goal, and to work closely and develop those relationships with the product development team so we could verify that our voices are being heard. So the pilot preparation took place from the 27th of May to July 12th, 2019. And so that involved really watching extensive amounts of training videos, from everything for how to set it up, to how to do menial tasks like ordering materials, creating vendor records, etc. And I think I counted up the hours, it was at least 35 hours of training videos. People can attest to that, it was a lot. And then the pilot testing began in mid-July and went all the way through mid-October. And what that looked like was every week we had exercises that were given to us by SWAN Dynamics, and we developed a worksheet with prerequisites. So sometimes an assignment would be to watch this video and then complete these exercises. The exercises covered everything from setting up for cloud acquisitions, and this is all in this packet that took up so much room, and to finally we did a fiscal close. So we really explored really every aspect of this product as thoroughly as we could. So the main takeaways that we came away with. At the jump, Blue Cloud Acquisitions uses a different organizational structure than Symphony does, so it requires you to think about your data a little differently. An example of that is that every title is its own purchase order. So right now in Symphony, a purchase order is a collection of titles, kind of like a cart on anyone's website, and you order all of these titles under one purchase order. It's not that way in Blue Cloud Acquisitions. Every single title is its own. So that's just an example of how using a new product makes you restructure the way you have to think about your approach to your ordering. So that can be a little uncomfortable, but can also be a positive thing depending on how you view it. The big one for me is that acquisitions data, like I said earlier, is housed outside of the Symphony server. So that's really exciting. It has fantastic potential, and that's the biggest attraction to using this product. Also, fund hierarchies are much more elaborate and granular. You can have parent-child relationships, and these are things that you can't do in Symphony right now, for those of you that are familiar with acquisitions. So that is also exciting. The interface is fairly intuitive and easy to use, like a lot of the Blue Cloud products, so that's great too. And now, of course, there are a few things that aren't ready yet. So invoicing is not yet fully developed. Right now, invoices have to be imported in a proprietary file format that was developed during one of the pilots that you guys did with a different customer. So you can't go into Blue Cloud Acquisitions and actually create an invoice app. It just doesn't exist. That being said, they're extremely aware of that, and they're working on developing that. So that's an example of something that's being worked. And then, of course, EDI. It's not yet functional, and that's something a lot of our libraries rely upon. So those were two of the biggest things that I think we gave feedback to Mike at SWAN Dynamics, that those are things that are very important to us and came out of the pilot. So our next steps are to continue monitoring the Blue Cloud Acquisitions updates. They actually just released the newest Blue Cloud update a couple days ago, and there was a big update that affected both cataloging and acquisitions, so that's exciting. We're talking about establishing a small fund for SWAN material purchasing, so we can continue to test the interface and stay involved and keep all of that working knowledge that we gained fresh. And then continue to work with vendors on developing templates to do consistent file formats. Like I think earlier someone mentioned we did some work with Midwest Tape with the combo packs, and we did some work on their behalf through vendors. We want to do that kind of thing consistently for all file structures with acquisitions. So this will just be part of that conversation. And then we're thinking of new libraries that are not presently using acquisitions, but would be moving to acquisitions, starting up with cloud acquisitions in Dark Symphony. And so that would be an exciting step. And then, of course, we'll continue to monitor and participate in the Strategic SPP, which stands for Strategic Partnership Program. I always forget that one. So those are our next steps. Any comments from the people that participated? Any questions?
As a library that's not currently using acquisitions, but we're wanting to start and probably want to start onto the cloud, I know that there's a lot of things that aren't figured out yet, but is there like a ballpark date of when you think it might all come together?
Ballpark date is a little difficult because it relies on when they're going to be updating things, right? I think some things are ready to go now. So, for example, we have some acquisitions libraries that just use batch loading. That's all they do, and they actually don't even do orders. It's kind of unusual. That would be capable now. So it depends on what you want to get out of it. If you are a library, which we actually do have some acquisitions libraries that don't invoice, we have at least one. It's a little bit of an unusual case. If that were someone that were interested, they may be able to start trying to cloud now too. So kind of depends, but for me, invoicing is critical, so as soon as that's fixed, that's the biggest.
One key thing, Amy, from Downers, it's not generally available yet. So this is still just a pilot. So I just want to clarify for everyone, they haven't released anything yet, but what we've seen with the Blue Cloud product line is that when it does get released, it may not be like have 100% of the functionality maybe that you desire at a given point, but we do think that when it does get released, it will be a viable product for some of our libraries, and maybe some of these new libraries that are looking to join SWAN have expressed, we don't use acquisitions now, but we'd like to do it. It would make no sense for us to bring them up on a Symphony acquisition setup. We would say it would only be done in the Blue Cloud app, if it's available. Dawn's got her hand up.
Yeah. Although it's not an available product, organizations and libraries that have participated in the pilot, it is available too. So we do have flexibility when Sam thinks it's ready to use, we can coordinate that with Cersei Dynix because of all the hard work that Rebecca and Sam and Julie did in the pilot.
Yeah, and one of the things I would suggest for Downers or Roselle or whoever's coming in, make a list of the way that you want it to function. I mean, something that Julie and I found is even between our two libraries, we have some differences. She puts in on-order records at their library. We don't do that. You know, just make a list of what are the functions that you want at your library. I mean, you know, something that Julie did that was really, really cool that I thought, she created this hierarchy, and I thought, I mean, it was great. I didn't go quite as far into it because I just didn't take the time at St. Charles, but, you know, like at my library, that's what I kind of came up with a list of what things would we need to have to be, you know, what would be necessary for us to go with this product. And I think each library is different. If, for example, Downers decided not to do invoicing, or if you just wanted to show on-order records or something like that, you know, there would be a way, even in, you know, if Downers got a login like what we have, because I think it wasn't live, but it was still showing on order, right? Like if we put
It was the test server.
The test server was only showing. Okay.
Yeah.
So you would be only going into the test server in the way that it is now. But I think that's just really important, you know, have the libraries come up with, what do we really need? Are we doing EDI invoicing? Are we doing batch loading? Are we showing on order records?
Well, and looking at it, like, you've had an experience of going through this extensive pilot and doing all of that work, and now you probably have fleshed out in your head what you really need, now that you know what it looks like.
I also think for the libraries going from workflows to acquisition or to Blue Cloud, it might be more difficult than if you're starting from scratch and saying, I'm going to build this, you know, from start, you know, because I think it's really, I mean, I got a lot out of using it.
Well, and I think that Sam kind of touched upon, and Rebecca did too, it's not fully,
independent in that you still do need some, not necessarily the workflows, I mean, the acquisitions module and workflows, but you do need to do Symphony workflows work, like you can't function, anyway. But it is, I mean, it is viable and it is much easier to use. It is, and I think, like Erin said, if you don't have to unlearn the 10 years of using acquisitions, it's much easier. Because you keep, like, I kept wanting to do things that the acquisitions module could do, and I couldn't. And it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just that it does things differently.
I think it was easy to use. There's no manual right now. There's, 35 hours of webinars, which I don't know, for me, I like to have something online that I can do.
Yeah, maybe you can
But
keep
that
research.
may be,
I'd say we also learned quite a bit as far as what time commitment would be if they are offering a pilot. We've learned that too, that it's like, the report that we included in the packet, we wanted to show when we do a pilot, the expectation is it's like almost taking a college class, and that you have to do required viewing and prep and answer assignments.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. And public thank you to those who participated.
With that being said, do you think you'll pursue other pilots as they become available?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think we're already seeing some new features that are coming, right?
Oh, yeah.
As far as within this, but we're also, doing some tire kicking on some of the other Blue Cloud components, such as circuit cataloging. Certainly, we look at some of the pieces of, like, let's say, Blue Cloud circulation. We'll probably have a very likely role to play in that tool juggling that we talked about with the Clarity report, that maybe perhaps it's an opportunity to at least collapse maybe 2 tools into one, meaning you would have a web interface that has all the book jackets, as part of the display. It's a staff interface, but it's also blends some of the things that are maybe attractive of the enterprise catalog, but also provides more staff functionality. So that is an official pilot. These are actually products that are out there that are live, available to us, but we just, we haven't provided logins to all SWAN libraries because we instruct you on that, also make you aware of what features and limitations there are. There are some other pilots that we're participating in internally. They're more administrative tools, I'll just say at this point, that are compelling for us to maybe look at adopting, but they would be not something necessarily that I think you all would be using, but they are new tools that I think would certainly help the consortium. And I'll be sharing more with that at the board at some point, because we're kicking the tires on some of these new tools, and they may be worth us purchasing. Thank you, Sam. Usually we have announcements that our member library directors would like to share. We wanted to at least make you aware of a few other of these announcements, and I'll ask my staff to jump in and help clarify any of this. I would say the Blue Cloud Central release, I don't have details on that, but that's already happened, correct?
Yes.
So this is more just making everyone aware that when they say Blue Cloud has moved up to another version, that happens globally. So all their customers move to this version all at once. So it's not like SWAN says, we're going to set aside a date and move to this 1910 version. They just say they're doing it, and we have to pay attention to the date. Unlike that is that we do have to schedule enterprise and Symphony upgrades. So we're excited that we also have scheduled the enterprise 501 upgrade that's coming up in just a couple weeks. And then we're also looking at January doing a Symphony upgrade. So this enterprise upgrade is going to happen Wednesday, December 18th. We have sent out an announcement of that. There will be a Q&A that we'll host online through our GoToMeeting platform. So that's December 10th, that's next week.
at 1:30. And we'll go over all the display changes based on all the work that has been done with our enterprise test system with 501. This does also include customizations that we have made within our user experience group. And I want to say that group has also been taking this version of enterprise out to our libraries and testing it with patrons. I was involved in one of those at Eisenhower, where we sat down with 1 hour scheduled time with patrons to go over the interface, testing certain things. We caught some things that weren't quite working at that point, so it's like, oh good, we did this test and caught something that wasn't quite right, got good feedback. So I just want to note that there are some display changes that we'll review. On the go-to meeting, staff have presented them here for you just to highlight that on search results in enterprise, you're going to see what you're probably used to as far as seeing individual library on-shelf items. But we also have some changes as far as if individual copies are not listed or none are on shelf, it will just say all copies in use. And then there's indications to place a hold or then click to view all the copies at all libraries. This is using Eisenhower as an example. And it's also showing that maybe there aren't any copies at all at Eisenhower. So then it's more clear to the patron as far as being able to place a hold or view the copies at other SWAN libraries. Did I get that right, Tara?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun doing that user testing. I mean, it's exhausting. You wouldn't think. Then we camped out in the lobby and, come try out a tablet, see how it looks on our mobile devices. So there's been big improvements as far as that. It's been a long time coming. We're excited. We kind of wanted to bring 2019 to a close by getting us on this enterprise version, and then we'll kick off 2020 with the Symphony update. Stephen, was there anything you wanted to add about that? We'll announce the date. We'll also let everyone know about the client updates, but I think every member library at this point has gone through this, even our newest 19 libraries. Green Hills we have to probably give you a little bit more attention as far as okay, here's your client update, what do you do? But that said, we've got these pretty much down pat. So I think there's a lot of less anxiety about doing those Symphony upgrades than maybe there have been in the past. And I'll stop. Member announcements or any questions about those changes? Ed, do you want to come up? Facilitate any membership sharing?
I'd like to share that it's purely coincidental that Aaron and I are wearing the same shirt. Any other announcements? Any big news? Exciting things? Big news. Nothing to share. Okay, then our next meeting is on March 5th. The next board meeting is on March 5th. The next board meeting is Friday, December 20th. You all always welcome. And I think we can adjourn. Thank you.